Final very important topic. Please sit down and be quiet. I was nice the first time, a little less nice. Having people come up to the stage now, thank you. 2 out of 4. See Step is on the way up, Randy around. Okay, well, we're very, thank you for the settle down. We're very sad that our plant moderator for this event, Emma Cameron, who's a MMT board member at Stony, New York, is not able to join us because she's very ill, but we are very grateful and very lucky that someone who has only recently come to the MMT community has agreed to step in last minute. Hannah Judson, I'll let her introduce herself and kick off this final panel on MMT and build the MMT movement.
Of all of the people on stage right now, no one who needs the least applause, please. My name is Hannah Judson. I'm an undergraduate student from DePaul University. I'm interested in economic sociology, and that's how I ended up here today. I did not know a single person in this room 48 hours ago, so this is kind of a 0 to 60 really fast in terms of building the movement. But I do want to just offer some brief introductions of our panelists. Stephanie Kelton, as everyone knows, Professor of Public Policy and Economics at Stony Brook, Senior Economic Advisor to the Bernie 2020 campaign, and previously the Chief Economist to the Senate Budget Committee Minorities. Randy Ray, who's joining us, is a Professor of Economics at Bard, a Senior Scholar at the Levy Economics Institute, and he's also the co-author of the new macroeconomics textbook with Bill Mitchell and Mark. Andres Bernal is a doctoral student in public policy at the New School of Public Engagement and a lecturer in urban studies at City University of New York, Queens College. He's also an advisor to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Jessica Cisneros' congressional campaign in Texas's 28th district. And then Kate Aronoff is a writing fellow at the Type Media Center and a master's student in economics at John Jay College. She's written for The Intercept, In These Times, Yeoman, and others, and is the leader, advocate, and theorist of the Green New Deal, whose writing served as the inspiration for Representative Ocasio-Cortez's recent and hugely popular animated video showing what a Green New Deal future could look like. So I just want to, let's a round of applause for her. And then I'd like to invite Andres up to present.
Thank you, Hannah. How's everybody doing? Yeah. It's been a long weekend, but it's been a great weekend. I'm really happy to be here with all of you. So, building the MMT garden of awesomeness. Little tongue-in-cheek, but I'm playing on 2 concepts here. One, of course, is invoking the Green New Deal, which for me is kind of a central topic of my work and the political moment that we're living right now. And then the second point is this idea that I touched upon yesterday, which is part of why I feel a lot of affinity with the MMT movement. And so, for example, in my own life, kind of part of my own narrative, being an immigrant here to the United States, I got here when I was 4 years old. And one of the things that you learn very quickly growing up is that you don't get invited to a lot of the party per se, right? You're othered in a lot of ways. Your communities are othered in many different ways. And part of that story means that you have to assimilate yourself to dominant cultures, dominant orthodoxies, dominant ways of life, ways of thinking, ways of forming our identity and our national identity, right? That sounds a little familiar because there's also an orthodoxy in economics that says you have to do things a certain way, think a certain way, see the world a certain way, and then if you don't, you're not invited to the party. So one of the things that I learned through many of my leadership development experiences and many of the same trainings that I learned alongside Alexandria is that, as I said yesterday, when you're not invited to the party, you create a better party yourself and bring cooler people to that party. So that's kind of the spirit of my presentation. So my background, a little bit of my methodological background is in philosophy. I came, before MMT, I was studying critical theory and social theory as an undergraduate, and very interested in the way, as yesterday Scott Fulwiler said, MMT shows us that there are no real economic problems, but there's social problems. And one of the things that I appreciate about MMT, and really all the great economists and political economists of our time, is that they've unveiled something that was thought to just be normal and natural and just the truth. And they show us a deeper truth. And that deeper truth shows us certain insights about our world and the way that it exists. And it poses questions to us. Are we okay with that, or do we want to do something with that? And so, of course, those truths or those lenses or those frameworks may have a kind of objective reality, but at the same time, we have to interpret them. Someone has to interpret that lens. And someone has to do something with that truth. And some institutions are the ones that have the authority and the power to convey and produce that knowledge to others. And so, as we all know, right now we live in a system and an orthodoxy where only certain kinds of perspectives are given to the population and controlled, and everything else is considered, taboo, or it's not taken seriously or whatnot. So the world as we know it, even facts, even observational frameworks and lenses that, yes, we understand, MMT is descriptive in a lot of ways, but even that notion requires a viewer, requires a person, requires an MMTer to decide what are we going to do with this knowledge, who am I going to associate with, and why does this matter to me? And so, it's really cool to be here amongst all of you because there is an affinity. We're all here from different backgrounds, different experiences and life experiences, but we come together because we know that we want a better life for all and a better dignity in the world, and that kind of unites us all. So that's a really cool thing to say, and something I'm very proud of. So the world is constructed socially in this way, and one of the main avenues that this happens is through language and through communication. So I'm very interested in how ideas are communicated through the different avenues of discourse and language and the different institutions that produce those systems. So the neoliberal thought collective. Before I knew about MMT, the story goes that I was fascinated by this concept of neoliberalism because it seemed no matter what we did, no matter what we tried to do, we were like stuck in this world, in this paradigm that doesn't seem to die. And even in 2008, after the financial crisis, it just came right back up. And even when everybody thought that we were going to elect somebody to finally do something differently, lo and behold, deep down, the same ideas were dominating. So what happened? How did this happen? So I'm a big fan of Philip Morosky. He's an economic historian. And one of the things that he does is trace back this story of neoliberalism, and it was referred to in the previous presentation. I thought that was really great. And it's this story of how even though many of the laissez-faire or orthodox neoclassical ideas were discredited during the Great Depression and leading up to the Second World War, what happened? Well, a lot of those people started forming groups together. They formed different societies and organizations. A very famous one is the Mont Pelerin Society. And they started getting funding from really powerful people and started to rethink how they can fight back against what they viewed as like this entrenchment of collective and socialist agendas and whatnot. So they started to form this thought collective of ideas. And something that I think is not often spoken about that Morosky shows in his work is that these neoliberals understood that the whole notion that there's a natural free market and it's just going to balance itself out, they understood that was bullshit. And what they ended up concluding is that they needed to use the state, take control of the state to force markets on the world. They needed to create a market-driven society through all institutions of power. And over time, over the entire rest of the 20th century, what we began to see is the way they infiltrated different aspects of our culture and society. Through academia, through politics, through the culture, through entertainment. Everything that we know and interact with in our lives is in some way influenced by these core ideas about neoliberalism. That the world is made up of markets, and it's our role. The government's role is to make sure that they're working to keep everything else out. If you are, things like crime or dysfunction, social dysfunction, that's bad for the market. So we got to make sure we have a strong law enforcement state. We got to have our prisons ready to take care of people because they're not investing enough in themselves, right? They're not investing in their human capital. They're not being entrepreneurial enough, and so they need to be taken out and reformed and disciplined again, so they can enter back into the market world and into this kind of society. And so this has been incredibly dominant. And at the core of these ideas, I believe fundamentally, the question of money plays probably the most important role, because for the neoliberals, money must be a commodity. And that is the way to capture our imagination from being able to propose things that might not operate through kind of this forced market logic and hyper-individualism of the world. So, in my opinion, this is one of the reasons why our culture is like pathologically incapable of thinking that maybe so many people that perhaps the government doesn't finance itself, perhaps money is a public good, a public utility that can be used in different ways. All right, so enter MMT, right? I came to MMT through economic sociology as well, through many of the ideas of Karl Polanyi, and Karl Polanyi believed that he was challenging the notion that many of the classical economists had laid out, that there was this natural category called the economy, and it was independent from other forms of social life. People's natural state was to barter and trade, and that is where money came from, that kind of sort of story. But MMT kind of challenges that, and Polanyi did as well. He talked about how money was one of these things called fictitious commodities, and that all economic life was actually embedded in social life. The first thing that exists is that we're social people. We exist in a public with one another, and all economic life comes from that. And all economic life, in all markets, in all enterprises, in all business, requires some form of power, and has required the state historically to create that world. So, not yet. I think MMT plays a very important role, and to me, I find it really interesting, this question of my interest in communication and discourse and narratives is very connected to even the origin of money itself, because as we've learned, and as Randall Ray has spoken about before, it's writing. It's the capacity to write that brings about these accounting mechanisms that give rise to this conversation of money, of keeping track of debts and redemptions. And that is a much different story from the one that we have heard about in the kind of classic story. So we've all heard all weekend that we know the different theories, we know MMT, we know the importance of public purpose, we know the importance of the way that a jobs guarantee can fundamentally transform many of the capitalist institutions that we have today and decommodify, I think that's key, decommodify labor in many different ways, but very, very important. It can decommodify sustainability and just our right to having a healthy ecology through a Green New Deal. And so we heard all about this thing, right? But the question is now, what do we do, right? We're up against a paradigm that just does not want to let it go. And we've seen even from Democrats and even the left, a lot of ways, this resistance to think about the world in a different kind of way. So my work has been, especially in the last year, to integrate my research and my scholarship with my activism and my organizing, to be both a student and also a participant involved in this kind of transformation of thought that leads to transformation of action. And so I'm influenced by this idea called adaptive leadership, which was come up by Ronald Heifetz and Linsky. And part of the idea there is that the challenges that we face are not technical challenges. I mean, we have technical answers. We know what we can do. We know the operations of the Fed. We know all these things, right? People refuse to believe that this is what we have to do. So what we're up against, we have to transform the very paradigms that people use to inform and make meaning of their lives. And that is a fundamental adaptive challenge. And as Rowan stated, I believe on Friday, MMT is an evolutionary adaptive framework that's working as the world shifts and changes. We are finding new ways to advance the ideas that we're proposing. So these are some of the concepts that I've used in my work thus far. The first one, of course, is the shared vision and the importance of creating a shared vision. And yesterday I talked about asking ourselves, what kind of world do we want to live in? So that means that whether you're interested in the labor movement, whether you're interested in environmental politics, whether you're interested in monetary politics, whatever that is, we have to continue over time and iteratively to form a shared vision what do we want, whether that is dignity, whether that is the capacity to fulfill our life as human beings, whether that is to unleash our creative capacity, right? We're going to keep continuing to form a shared vision. The next idea here is the importance of collective learning, and that is that in our movement and in the different organizations that we represent, collective learning is critically important. What does that mean? It means that number one, we are not just the sum of our individual parts. We are more than that, of course, and that's we see how neoclassical economics has even infiltrated that, where so much of neoclassical economics is about how it's individual, atomized, rational actors coming together, but we're more than just a collection of our individual parts. And the second part of that is understanding that our different perspectives and experiences and histories and concerns and primary needs can come together to inform the way that we understand the world and the way that we're advocating for the jobs guarantee, the way that we're advocating for the Green New Deal and advocating for better understanding of macroeconomic policy, fiscal policy, right? So bringing together all these different insights and movements into one form of collective learning, and in such a way that helps us adapt. It's very important. That helps us adapt to the different things that come our way. Inquiry-based learning, of course, is an idea that kind of stresses that we're still emotional beings. One of the things that happens to a lot of activists is burnout. You're out there trying to do your thing, and you can burn out because it's a crazy world out there, and it's really rough on people. And I think that's something that the left often doesn't talk about enough. How can we create solidarity amongst one another to support that, but also having the capacity to look inwards, both in a collective sense and in an individual sense, to see what kind of skills, assets, capabilities, vision that we bring to the table, but also what's our baggage, right? Like what kind of traumas and issues are we bringing with us? Because to not have awareness of that is an easy way to self-sabotage ourselves. So to have those kind of honest conversations with our organizations, with the movement, and with ourselves to try to understand where is the light, where is the shadow, basically, if you will. I think it's a very powerful notion. The next idea that I have is social logics and social narratives. So, of course, the neoclassical economic orthodoxy, neoliberal orthodoxy, has a certain social logic that it puts into the culture. It has to do with believing, as Margaret Thatcher said, that there is no society. All there is individuals seeking their self-interest. The government's role is just to protect that and stay out of the way. So in everything that we do, we're introducing new social logics and new social narratives to our communities, to our organizations, and to one another. How do we cultivate that idea? And then lastly is systems thinking, which is understanding that there are different kind of interdependent connectivities around us and trying to map those out, learning to map out in our neighborhoods, in our homelands, in our companies and firms, what have you, how is power managed and governed? Who are the key players? Who are potential allies? And where is resistance going to come from, right? So kind of practicing mapping that out with one another and creating that framework is a critical part of organizing. Okay, so now that I mentioned that, I'm going to kind of conclude with a bit of a narrative or a story about my journey thus far in the last year with MMT, to show at least how I personally have tried to put into practice these ideas. So we'll begin before I even knew what MMT was. In 2016, before Trump's election, I was just hanging out here at my apartment, and as you can see, there's a certain person on the right who we were all working to create a podcast together. That was kind of our idea. And then Trump won. We kind of faced a crisis there. And so I started to think that we had to do some work. So I got into MMT. And this here is a conversation that I helped facilitate between, here's Stephanie, Pablina, you'll see some other people. So getting this conversation going was really important. A big part of my work revolves around trying to capture the narrative in the right places. So this is an article here that we released. We could pay for the Green New Deal. That I believe was fundamental to getting ahead of the game and saying, look, if we're gonna fight for this critical policy, we have to understand that the only way that we can achieve it is through this framework. Otherwise, we're in trouble. This year was at an event, and you might be wondering what the heck are these other two people are doing here. And these are musicians and artists who were talking about, they created a song through working together. I worked together with them to create a song that was about the way that traditionally art and music has been separated from money, as if they are in opposition. And the idea of this was to begin a conversation about how that doesn't have to be that way, and that through things like the jobs guarantee, being an artist doesn't have to mean being poor. I apologize here for the typed enter captions, kind of a mess of it. Anyways, my good friend Skender, where's Skender? Over there. Skender gave me a call and he said, hey man, come out to Austria. So I went out to Austria, met with Julia Herr, talked about the Green New Deal, gave some presentations. It turns out Julia Herr is on her way to join the European Parliament. So that was an amazing kind of thing there. Just from conversation, just going there talking to people, right? Okay. Somebody reached out after that for me to talk about science, and I thought to myself, I'm a social scientist, I'm kind of a post-structuralist, what am I going to offer to that? But then I thought, what? MMT is critical when we're talking about how are we going to support actual scientists to do their work for the public good. Yeah. So I wrote this article because I believe that's key, because the commodification of science and education has been one of the worst things that we possibly can have. So I'm going to move this quickly here. Here's Sarah Nelson. I met her at an event, and I thought to myself, labor is key to this movement. We started a conversation, we became friends, and the next thing we know, here's Sarah at the Non-Money Network conference and hanging out talking about the role of the labor movement in MMT and in the jobs guarantee. So that was a very important thing as well. Macmillan Publishing reached out to me and said, hey, we got a copy of this book for AOC. Can you get this to her? I thought, all right, that's a great public relations opportunity. So I kind of invented this and made this happen, to show what we represent, where we are, where we've gotten. So that was a great thing as well. Here I am at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, where I spent the summer with Matt Forstatter. Did some great work here. Got to know Sunrise over there. Just going to move quickly because I'm out of time. Shout out to Money on the Left and Monthly Review Online, which is an audience that oftentimes doesn't get our perspective. Went to Colombia, met with the person that got second place in the presidential elections, the progressive movement, the left in Colombia, talked about a job guarantee in Latin America, talked about using MMT to help them understand the challenges that they face and our responsibility and our foreign policy to them through an MMT lens. Young Turks, Chang, not usually a friend of our ideas in MMT, but we started that conversation. I'm happy to announce that the MMT view will be on the Young Turks this year. And I'll end with this. Lastly, this is the most listened to radio show in Colombia, and this is in Spanish, but it says here, all public spending is the creation of new money, and all taxes is taking that money out of the economy that was actually there for the whole country to hear. And it was wonderful lastly, here we are. This weekend. Heading up consistency is amazing. Thank you very much.
I want to say thanks, Andres, for your presentation, and I want to invite Kate up to give her presentation.
Hey everyone. That's a very nice introduction from the game. To note, for the record, I did not write it, so it's very complimentary. I don't write glowing things about myself often. I want to talk just a little more broadly about kind of how economics is factored into the GMD conversation, into the Green New Deal conversation, and sort of how it's changed it and sort of shaped how we think about climate issues more generally. And I'm sure we've all been very deep within the weeds of economics this weekend. I'm not an economist, so I will not go too deep into the weeds. But in my capacity as a reporter, I've been tracking all this stuff for a long time, so we'll offer it later on. I was a climate activist in college. I've been reporting on this stuff for the last 5 years or so. And the thing that really sticks out about the Green New Deal conversation is just how dramatically it's reframed this issue. And so for years and years and years, dating back to probably the 1970s, conversations about climate policy tended to focus on sacrifice, right? That We are all sort of equally responsible for this crisis, that we've all played a part in getting ourselves into this mess, whether that was pollution or nuclear arms or littering, and now carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas emissions and the impending end of human civilization. And so, sort of right out of the gate, what the Green New Deal said is that this is not an issue of scarcity. We are not all equally responsible for this problem. This is really an issue of investment and abundance. And it's not that we all have to give something up. It's that we need to figure out where to allocate society's vast resources to take on the greatest challenge human civilization has ever faced. So that was, great. That happened in about a week, and that is sort of the ground that we're playing on now. And I think what MMT sort of adds to that debate is just giving activists and organizers and policymakers sort of permission to dream, right? It's not only that we have this sort of space to do what we need to do to decarbonize the economy by mid-century globally, the latest much sooner in historical emitters like the United States, but permission to sort of think about what we want. What do we actually want the world to look like? And we know that the only problem with the economy is not that it runs off of fossil fuels and was built around it, but that there are myriad forms of inequality, particularly in the United States and sort of around the world. And so what does it actually look like to structure an economy that looks out for the many, not the few, as the British Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn put it. And I think that is sort of the foundation on which we're operating. So I'm very happy that we're not sort of thinking about climate within those constraints. But I do still think there is a sort of persistent thread that is likely to come back, depending on who gets in the White House in 2020, that just deserves sort of looking out for, so we don't sort of slip back to that. So before the Green New Deal burst onto the national stage was the occupation of the Nancy Pelosi's office in November 2018 with Representative Ocasio-Cortez and the Sunrise Movement. What dominated the conversation around climate policy was this very sort of neoliberal idea around carbon pricing. And as a preface for any sort of carbon pricing hands in the audience, I don't know how many of them are there, but I don't personally think carbon pricing is a bad idea, but I think it's a wrong sort of analytic approach to think about what needs to happen to deal with the climate crisis. And so you will still see people like Janet Yellen, you will still see sort of very prominent economists talking about this very efficient solution. And so I want to break it down a little bit just to say optimistically how far we've come, and also to make sure that we don't see the same sort of people who are pushing this approach in the Obama administration do that again if that's where we find ourselves several months from now. So the sort of carbon tax idea comes out of an assumption that the economy is doing just fine, right? That everything's working basically okay, that everything's going as we might want it to, and there's this problem, right? There's this problem called pollution, and this is a problem because it's not sort of factored into the market. It's not something that we have a price for, and that polluting firms are being allowed to just spew whatever they want in the atmosphere. And so the solution to that, the optimal job of climate policy, is to price this in, to bring this into the market. This is commonly referred to as an externality. Milton Friedman sort of friendly had a nicer word for it called neighborhood effects, like it was a pothole or something. And so the role should be just to put the right price on it. And the idea is not to figure out what price, from a sort of standard economic point of view. The idea is not to figure out what price you need to put on carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas emissions in order to keep emissions below the 2 degree threshold or well below set out in the Paris Agreement. Is to figure out how much do these things actually cost? How much do these externalities, in this case greenhouse gas emissions, cost, which is a sort of impossible task, right? Sort of conservative estimates of how much unlimited climate impacts, how much damage they will do, stretch upwards into the hundreds of trillions of dollars, which is not a sort of easy thing to factor in. And so the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, suggested that sort of carbon pricing to do that would be somewhere between $150 to $5,000 per ton. $5,000 per ton is effectively a ban on fossil fuels. But the sort of reigning idea here is that you can price that in, and that is all you need to do. That if you do that, sort of the rest of the economy will magically reorient itself around this price. That polluting firm will change all of their investment decisions, that everything will sort of adjust to make it happen. And so happily the Green New Deal, and I think to the credit of MMT, has really blown that out of the water. Blown the idea, put out by Thomas Morehouse, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics last year. He has said that it's been an advocate for this approach, that at 19 degrees of warming Celsius, which is a point beyond which there's arguably not life on Earth. Maybe a few sort of phytoplankton or something, probably not. That he estimates that will cost about 50% of GDP, which in a world in which there's not life on Earth, I'm not sure who is accounting for GDP. It's a confusing claim. Latest, but I think what sort of MMT enters into this conversation, what the Green New Deal framework sort of more broadly says, is it sort of names on its face that we can't just have this sort of very tiny tweak to the economy in order to deal with this problem. That this demands something much more in line with what scientists have been saying for years and years and years, which is that we need sort of fundamental transformative shifts in global economy that's been built, again, root to branch around fossil fuels, around coal and oil, that really sort of seeps through every facet of our economy, influences geopolitics, influences just about everything around us. And that just a market to equal must be enough. But it also reframes the spending conversation in ways that are really helpful. So even sort of not the sort of market dogmatists who have put out these sort of deranged ideas about carbon pricing, but even very well-meaning progressives have for years sort of said, carbon taxes make sense, or we need some sort of pricing mechanism in order to generate the revenue we need for decarbonization. The carbon pricing was sort of climate proposal in 2016, as recently as that, and the idea was, one that is appealing, I think, on its face, right? It's to say that these people have been ruining the world, they're trashing the planet, they should pay their fair share, and with that money, we can fund the things we need. And so I think what this approach does really, smartly, is to say that we should absolutely, tax the fossil fuel industry, absolutely, make these monsters pay their quote-unquote fair share of the problem, but don't do it because we need their money, right? Don't do it because we need to sort of take Exxon's profits and funnel them into solar panels. Do it because this is a scourge on the earth, right? Do it because there shouldn't there should not be fossil fuel incentives. And there are other, many other things to do, but on a very basic level, there should be much higher tax. So billionaires who we know contribute inordinately to the climate crisis, with their yachts and private jets, what have you. But that their profits are not sort of, we shouldn't hold decarbonization hostage to their existence, right? But should absolutely sort of punish them in every way we can, because our tax system is a sort of representative of our value system. So we should extend that to really being very hard on the extremely wealthy and polluting activities which go hand in hand. Similarly, it allows us to think about things like subsidies and budgets in similar terms, right? Which is that we know that there's far too much money being given to propping up the fossil fuel industry. The IMF has estimated about $5.1 trillion in indirect and direct subsidies annually in the US alone. Sort of more direct subsidies to the fossil fuel industry account for about $20 billion, right? And those are things that don't need to happen. Those are things that shouldn't be happening, and do, really open up sort of more space, more resources to use that money. We know that, our military spends a tremendous amount of money defending oil around the world, and looking for oil. As anyone who lived through the Bush years can attest to. And so, what I think an MMT framework says is, yes, this money should be moved around in different ways. There are things we can't be doing. We need to shift resources in another direction. It's not a matter of sort of moving enough widgets around so that they align for decarbonization. It's a matter of setting out a mission for what the economy should do and doing it. and not saying that we have to go and find enough and dig up enough money in order to make that happen. So I think it's hard to understate just how helpful that has been. I know the folks in the Sunrise movement, folks within organizations like DFA have found sort of the things said in rooms like this incredibly sort of influential. And it's great to see sort of the way that these and sort of the broader MMT community and folks sort of in fellow travelers in different parts of the world help to sort of chip away at the neoclassical assumptions that have underlied a lot of sort of climate thinking for a long time. And so I'll end just by saying, I think a few ways that folks in this room, folks who may be watching on the live stream, and I think particularly who are kind of situated academia, situated in places where they can be thinking about policy in a proactive way, how to help, in my sort of position as someone who writes about this stuff a lot and talks to a lot of people about this. So I think one is to really work with folks in other disciplines, as mentioned sort of just a few minutes ago, to think through what are, I think, some genuinely very new problems. So I think MMT and the sort of perspectives found up in it get us a long way, but the truth is that we have never figured out how to decarbonize a global economy. So there are a lot of new questions to be answered. One that I've been thinking about in particular, and I think that a lot of folks in the world of ecological economics have been thinking through in partnership with folks in the scientific community, is questions of things like material throughput, right? So it's entirely possible that we have economic mobilization, that we have sort of something we call the Green New Deal, that builds a lot of solar panels, that gets wind power up all along our coast, that insulates housing, all these things. It's very possible that we do that and still raise emissions, right? Because we know that if we don't transform consumption away from cheap consumer goods, that will continue to raise emissions, and there's a real sort of question about how to do that in time. We do have a very limited time frame, 12 years, as the IPCC sets out, to have emissions, and so these are not impossible problems in the way that they're often phrased, but I do think it takes a lot of sort of cross-disciplinary energy to really be thinking about that and to be developing kind of new tools to unveil. The second, I think, maybe more importantly, is helping folks like Sunrise, helping folks on the ground really understand some of the institutional mechanisms behind this, understanding how the Fed works, understanding how the Treasury works, and really getting a sort of nitty-gritty knowledge of how Washington works, even how states work. Because one sort of consequence of the left, having not been in power maybe ever, is that there actually isn't, a sort of wealth of knowledge about how these institutions work and how they function. The right has sort of captured this thing called this monstrous thing called administrative law under its own auspices, and that presents a huge challenge to the left. Part of the neoliberal thought collective that folks have mentioned, and Andres mentioned, is that they really have been amassing all this knowledge for 40 or 50 years. I think there are many folks in this room who have all that, who know kind of how this stuff works. So working with organizers to spread that knowledge, and on a very functional end, if we have a progressive in the White House come 2020, God willing, there are 1,000+ administrative seats to fill, and if those seats are not, and if there are not enough people around who actually know how these departments work, those seats will probably go to the same old people who got us into this mess in the first place. In the last Democratic administration. So figuring out how to train people up such that they can really fill those spots and know how to use them and know how to make the best of them. Because hopefully that's where we are. Hopefully we are, come January 2021, really trying to figure out how to make the most of all of these different agencies, all this messy thing called the U.S. government, and reorient everything toward the project of decarbonization, toward building a more just economy. So that's it.
So I would say thanks, Kate, and then also Randy and Stephanie decided to forego their presentations in favor of a longer discussion period. So if I could get some mics, I have two questions I want to ask, and then I can up to further discussion. Okay, oh, hello.
Road is not on. Oh, now it's on.
Okay, so the first question I have is specifically for Stephanie and Randy. Looking at, I think, purpose of the panel is to look at building and movement. And I just wanted to ask you, as sort of long-standing founding members of the MMT community, what are things that you've done that you're the most proud of in terms of building the movement that you think aren't necessarily visible parts of that community building, things that might have happened behind the scenes that you see as the most sort of critical pieces of creating this
movement? I have to think about it, because like the behind the scenes things that we've done that have helped to push the ideas into the fore. I mean, gosh, it's almost like saying, tell us the good stuff, right? That it hasn't made public. I did a little bit of that yesterday, you know, conversations that take place privately with colleagues in academia, with politicians who I won't out, because part of the reason that we feel comfortable having those conversations is that there is a presumption that we're having a private conversation. I think that what's important and what I wanted you all to hear is that those conversations are taking place and that the ideas are taken more seriously by people who have influence in terms of policymaking than you might gather by seeing the headlines that read, you know, Larry Summers calls MMT voodoo economics, it's dangerous, and all these other sort of things. If you're just seeing those headlines, you might think, wow, nobody's listening to these guys. They're not getting, you know, a hearing on anyone who really matters. And I've always had the opinion that this is largely what matters. It's all of us coming together. It's the movement groups. It's the ways in which our ideas are filtering through and having an impact on conversations that are taking place around the Green New Deal or around Medicare for All, whatever the case may be. But to the extent that it also matters, because to put policy into practice, you need the people who actually write legislation and pass bills. And so we're having success there.
Okay, I'm sure everyone here is aware that MMT began about 25 years ago. And we had about half a dozen different sort of fronts and ways to move forward. 22 years ago, Matt and I decided to move to UMKC because it had a PhD program. And so I'd say that was the first front. We wanted PhD students. And I think there were about a dozen of those graduates who are now out in universities around the United States who are producing the next generations of UMT students. Mostly teaching undergraduates, but that's fine. If you inoculate the undergraduates, it doesn't matter what PhD program they go to, they will never go back. Never go. Both Stephanie and I were lucky enough to take undergraduate courses in a school that had paradox economics, and that's why the school I went to had Hyman Sorry, the rest of the department is thoroughly orthodox, and most of what we did was thoroughly orthodox, but it had no impact whatsoever. So that's not, I mean, it's visible, you've all seen the people here, but I think that that front was very successful. We had a number of other fronts that were ranged between complete failures to fairly unsuccessful. The second front was to try to bring along our heterodox friends. And so at UMKC, the other thing we did when we arrived was that we would hold conferences and seminars and bring visiting scholars in, and we would support them while they were there. And they would participate in all of this stuff with us, and they would sit in the office that we gave them while we funded them and secretly write critiques of MMT. So I think trying to bring along an heterodox economist was almost a complete failure. But finally, I'll skip to the final one, which is the final front, which is moving forward now. And I agree that it is a Green New Deal. It's not possible to do the Green New Deal without MMT. Taxing behaviors in order to pay for stuff is not going to do it. And we have to tackle this, as you have said, I'm sure, and rightly, as the biggest challenge since World War II. And it's much more than the Green New Deal in the way you say that, narrowly defined Green New Deal. The green part is just the tip of the iceberg. We have to fundamentally change society here and all over the world. And finally, in a way that's very scary, but if there's any advanced species on any planet out there that has survived more than 10,000 years, they've gone through this successfully. So we can rest assured that there is some planet somewhere that has solved this problem, and maybe will do.
My second question I'd like to pose to each of you individually, and it sort of stems from the workshop discussion that I had this morning, actually. And it talks, my question is about narratives. And specifically, I want to ask you, what do you see the role of the sort of social ritual of storytelling? How do you see that in community building as a tool to sort of grow the MMT movement?
I'll take a question on narratives anytime. How do you sustain a movement? How do you start a revolution? You don't change the question. Who said that? You change. I'm sorry, I did backwards tonight. I did a 4-hour-long interview on camera this morning by Brett and Josh. Let me do it again. Take 2. How do you start a revolution? It's not by changing your answers, it's by changing the questions. Right? So what MMT does is flip this narrative around. So instead of the question being, how are we going to pay for it? MMT says, wrong question. How are we going to resource it? Right? The conventional narrative asks, what is the natural rate of unemployment? MMT says, why would we tolerate unemployment? The conventional narrative says, how should we use the interest rate to control the inflation rate? MMT says, how do we measure price indices? Where do those come from? And how should we be thinking about inflation? Conventional economics asks, how should we reduce the size of the budget deficit? MMT says, why don't we reduce the size of the budget deficit? And right, you're with me. We're changing the questions again and again. And I think that's important because what we need, all of us, is a common narrative. We need a common frame. Every movement, whether it's the Green New Deal, whether it's strike the debt, whatever it is that you're fighting for, you need to understand that the funding you seek, presumably you're seeking some funding, doesn't have to come out of some other part of the budget. You don't have to cannibalize somebody else's program in order to fund yours. You don't have to point to the earmark, the new tax revenue, in order to provide the revenue. We change the question. We know we can fund a program. We ask then, are offsets necessary? Or would it cause inflation, right? Is it necessary to offset all or some of this spending? And if we had all of the various movement groups, MMT informed, where they were better positioned to advocate their own interests with a common frame, then we could even be less antagonistic to one another.
I would agree with all that. And I think it's pretty good because having been in and around sort of climate spaces for a while, bristle a little bit at like the question narrative sometimes, because for a pretty specific reason, which is that there's been this sort of massive subfield within a green space of like climate communication, right? And sort of saying that the problem, the reason why we haven't passed comprehensive climate legislation in the United States is because we haven't been talking about it the right way. Even around the Green New Deal, there was some sort of conversation in this world. Should it not this world of that one? Should we call it a clean New Deal? It's like these sort of like meaningless distinctions people make. But I think what's so sort of frustrating about that is that, and why I think it's important to sort of run a conversation sort of beyond narrative, but I'll get to why I think narrative is so important for this. Is that the reason we have a past climate policy in the United States is because we don't account, right? It's because there's not, there has been an enormous fossil fuel industry. There has been sort of entire apparatus of right finance for years and years and years. It was millions and millions of dollars spent to spread misinformation about whether the climate crisis exists because, as Naomi Klein and others have pointed out, I think the right really does have a sort of guttural understanding of how this stuff works, right? They know the full implications, in their heart of hearts, they know the full implications of what the climate crisis means for them, which is that if this is true, if the planet really is warming, if we are sort of hurtling towards catastrophe, that rips out their worldview. That means that everything has to change. So they're pretty open to it. Stanford Heart Institute conference earlier this summer, I said, of course, if this is true, everything has to change. There's no cost too great, to save the planet. That's obvious. We just think it's not. So, and I think figuring out what the right sort of, how do you build a narrative that builds power? I think is something that I think about a lot. I think it's something that's true of these conversations too. And then, MMT is really sort of an economics for the 99%. And the economics of the very Green New Deal is the same, is the economics for many. And so I think people really need to see themselves in that in ways that are very hard historically in the climate and environmental space because, as I was saying a few minutes ago, environmentalists too often have asked people to get something up, to ask people to sacrifice in order to solve this problem. And I think what having this sort of framework of abundance creates, and I think the sort of narrative work that MMT is really good at is to say, that's not true, you can see yourself. Right? That this will make the world an objectively better place for all, but the people who are above the poverty. It's a very small minority of the population. Soft incentives, sort of, billionaire class, etc. But for most people, this is sort of this is the way to improve livelihoods across the board. And I think the way that I see the Green New Deal is sort of as a kind of virtuous cycle, right? That going beyond sort of traditional greening mechanisms, going beyond just saying, how do we solve this sort of very narrow problem, which is not a very narrow problem, of moving the economy off of fossil fuels. We know that that's like big shifts, but how can you sort of deliver real change to people's lives? And I think in sort of scarcity mentality, it's very hard to do that. It's very hard to think beyond, we'll put enough solar panels out, just enough so that we can reach this. And sort of just, totally throwing that open and opening sort of box of, just how much we do to really transform our economy in positive, climate-friendly ways, really allows people to sort of see themselves in it and join the fight, and really get excited about fighting for this and fighting for this new world that it's, just not hard to tell the story of. If you start with where you're at, you don't, need to round Peter to make home.
I think one of the reasons and ways that we can know that neoliberalism has been so effective is when the other side, and therefore us, speaks on their own terms, and we implicitly accept their assumptions. And so when you have people call themselves sound finance socialists, the depth to which they've kind of entered are, they've entrenched their power over us. And so that's why narrative is so powerful, in my opinion. When we, as Stephanie was saying, learn to change the question, what ends up happening is that they constantly have to backtrack and justify their own theories, which are bankrupt anyways. And so the more we do that, the more we start to take more and more space and control of how we speak, how we speak in public, how the public sphere functions. And that's a big part of building power, which I agree with Kate. At the end of the day, that's what this is all for. It's to build power. But you have to sustain power as well. And narrative, language, and discourse, in my opinion, is one of the ways that people justify and rationalize, even what they deserve themselves. I mean, all around the world, we see working people who are just working way too long, getting paid way too little, and somehow people just believe that's just the way the world works, and it's okay, right? Because our imaginations have been co-opted. And so to believe that we deserve something better, to believe that that's possible, to believe that it's possible to not destroy the planet and still live sustainable lives, we have to come up with the frameworks and the descriptive and prescriptive analysis that opens that up so that we say, oh my God, yes, I will flourish as a human being when we have a sustainable economy. So that's my take on it.
I'll be very brief. Just continuing with that frame. So everyone says that we have a government budget deficit. In our textbook, we decided not to use budget and deficit together. So we moved part of the way. We didn't go far enough. And in the second edition, maybe we can take it a bit further. We talked about it, but it's difficult. So what we actually have is a net government spending surplus. The government is surplus spending, and that is good for us. They're spending more than their revenue, which allows the rest of us, the non-government sector, to have net spending deficits. We are the ones who are deficient. Our government is running a surplus. And because it does, we can be deficit spending, which means that we get to accumulate net financial assets.
I like that.
I decided not to use the word revenue in the book that I'm finishing up right now because, I think that's actually a good
I guess at this point, we can open it up to the floor for question. Okay, I saw like 3 hands shoot up over there, so why don't we do 1, 2, 3 and do a round of answers?
Go start over there. 1, 2, 3, 4. Go around.
One thing I'm really worried about is just if you look at like history in the past 100 years, like in Nicaragua, they had mild social reforms, and the capital class came out with the Contras. And so we were trying to do the Green New Deal, and we have mild reforms or antitrust regulation things. How do we know that we won't, like, how do we know what the resistance from the capitalist class looks like, and are we prepared for it?
We'll get a couple of them.
There have been a few prominent people recently talking about whether or not green growth is actually possible. Jason Hickel, I believe that's his name, is a very prominent guy talking about how we actually need degrowth if we're going to curb emissions and avoid ecological collapse. And Dean Baker wrote a prominent piece saying no, or at least he said he wasn't convinced that that was true. And I'm just wondering what y'all's opinions are.
In terms of like moving forward, I love everything that I'm hearing here. One of the things that I personally wrestle with When people say, you know, don't criticize Democrats, they're our allies, don't punch down, which is great, and I mean to offend no one, but which is why specifically when I talk to people, I promote policies. I try to avoid talking about people, I try to avoid talking about politicians and parties. But with the rise of someone like Elizabeth Warren and the people that she is surrounding herself with, not Bob Hawkins, who I love in New York, you know, but she's courting Hillary Clinton, you know, donors, et cetera, et cetera. I'm having a hard time keeping my mouth shut and simply talking about about policies when I see someone who's supposed to be an ally basically taking my children and holding their head underwater. And when I try to rescue my kids, I feel like other people are telling me, stop punching Democrats. Well, the Democrats drowning my kid. What do you want me to do? So how do you wrestle with problems like that when you feel like people who are theoretically allies are going in a direction that you feel is fundamentally going to end badly?
Take those three for now.
I guess to answer that last question, I mean, I've never had all my faith in politicians, and I don't think people should. So we have to think strategically. And there's a role for politicians in electoral politics, and we know what those limits are, but we also have to be focusing on ongoing movement building outside of that too. So that way, that way we don't get the ideal situation that we want, we just don't stop. But we keep going, we keep building, and we keep it. So, Barry Goldwater lost, but the Republicans didn't move to the center. They doubled down, and we ended up with Ronald Reagan, because they understood that lesson. And so we have to not put all of our hopes on just one person. Although yes, support as much as we can, but also keep building. It's the long game that matters.
Assuming we have time for the long game. But,
right. But
that's what frustrates me. I also feel like the hourglass is running out.
I'm sure I understand, but in that same sense, it was the social movements that put pressure on whoever is in power to do what we want.
100%.
So that's what I'd say about that.
Yeah, I'll just go through something when I ask. I mean, in terms of this is the capital class, I think we should expect absolutely everything, right? Like the fossil fuel industry is the most powerful industry that's ever existed. In 2009, they threw everything they had to fight policy of fractionless emissions as the Green New Deal, which is the framework of on policy. And so I think we should not expect anything less than world-changing amounts of resources being thrown in the sunrise and anyone else is looking for Green New Deal. That is just the sort of reality we live in. We know, I was going to say the Koch brothers, is pull through everything, as they did at the they already are spending millions of dollars to make a Green New Deal. This is a proposal that is completely threatening to the power fleet. And I think, are we prepared for that? I don't know, honestly. Washington State just last year tried to pass a fairly modest carbon tax that would build a bunch of green infrastructure, and the fossil fuel industry spent $31 million to fight the state level emission. BP, a company which ostensibly supports a carbon tax in some sort of public way, spent $15 million. Was responsible for $13 million for that. So, I don't think we can underestimate just how many resources are being spent to fight this. But I think the thing we have on our side is, on the one hand, people, right? There are more of us than there are of them. And the fact that, our ideas actually are pretty common, right? Like the idea that fossil fuel executives should continue to be allowed to make billions of dollars to crash the planet is not, I think, something that has wide popularity, right? And so I think that it is going to take a lot of things. It's going to take a lot of everything you have, basically. And I think what is helpful about MMT is to say that the challenge for that is not that there's not enough money to be found. And so I think if we can establish that as a baseline, which I think is I've been sort of happy about where the conversation has been so far. The fight becomes about how to build that power to really make this happen. And so, yeah, what I would add to that is just that, we know that like the sort of myth of the bipartisanship is a virtue. It doesn't work. We know, especially in context, we know that if we make the goal, how do we water this down enough so that the Exxon Mobil's and BP's of the world will maybe come on board and support it for a little bit. It's a failed strategy. We know it's a failed strategy, and so why not go above and beyond and actually say and push for what we need? I think that's to just to reiterate what I was saying earlier. I think that's how we bring enough people into this coalition, into this movement to make that possible. On green growth and degrowth, I have thought about this question a lot. I don't think degrowth is necessarily the most smart public framing for this. And there are a lot of people who have not been allowed to consume enough, and that's a sort of tough thing for folks to hear, who may not have electricity in large parts of the world, who have not been allowed to live the lives that many of us in this room haven't been allowed to. But I do think degrowth advocates are right about a great number of things. And I think I spoke a little bit about material throughput questions, and I think it's worth grappling with. I think the language of growth is tremendously helpful, and to order the conversation around that, I think really it gets us started where we need to be. I think there are a lot of opinions about this, but I think that having it at the center is not the conversation we need to be having. The conversation we need to be having is how do we build prosperity for as many people as possible in a way that doesn't disturb the planet. And to have one of those terms rather than the sort of archaic metric that we only started using a while ago, and actually doesn't mean that much to most people.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with those points on growth. So a lot of us have way too much, and there's still a lot of people who don't have enough. So capitalism it grows extensively and intensively. It takes over more and more of our economic activities, and it spreads all over the world. Capitalism, capitalist system must grow. Okay, and so that is a problem with it. However, it has to grow in nominal terms. It doesn't necessarily have to grow in terms of resource throughputs. So what we have to do is control that. We also have to take back much of the economy away from capitalism and turn it back to non-capitalist production. Which does not so it is a big danger, but this is solvable. Hi.
Randy's got to go catch a train and then a flight.
Thanks, Randy. I'll go ahead and. Okay. So I have what I hope is a constructive concern about the way that we message MMT ideas about trade in the context of trying to build a Green New Deal, global Green New Deal, a climate justice movement, right? My concern is that the theses that we have are great, but then they get sort of cast in a way that doesn't really jive with the rhetoric that is used by some rights movement, climate justice alliance, for instance, and you get into kind of issue. So, like, we start with acknowledging a thesis that many mainstream economists acknowledge and focus on, inputs are real benefit, exports are real costs, so like stop worrying and screaming about the trade deficit, right? But then we get so caught up in that, I think, that sometimes we say, give us all the inputs. Give us all the imports. Like, come on, like the United States needs all the imports for you, our question. And so we wind up on the other side of this question with this kind of intensity that I'm afraid reinforces consumerism and reinforces American exceptionalism, right? We want to say that Trump is dumb about trade and liberals are dumb about trade, and all that's very true. But then sometimes there's this sort of focus on imports that is really, I'm not sure it's conducive to our alliance movement building with climate justice, for
wondering about thoughts about that. No comment again, if it's okay.
Okay, my comment is more about organization and dissemination. The writing has been extremely organized. They had a blueprint which they slowly implemented from the Powell memo. They found groups to do their lay work at the very lowest tiers using fundamentalist churches and the NRA. And then from there, those groups went to higher and higher tiers until we find like a family research center embedded in Washington and with a globalized neoliberal movement for capitalism and imperialism. How do we rate the world?
One more question.
So, I'm so glad this panel is here because it's the most important for me, especially Kate, being the one who does all the research for the ecological economics group. So I see a marriage. I see William Reese, Joshua Farley, John Erickson, Lisa Carl, Nate Higgins, Robert Costanza, which would be with Stephen Hale, Peter G. Brown, Peter Victor, Richard Heinberg, the Netto's Institute, and Bernie has the University of Vermont, and it's right there. Wonderful ecological economics school. And those folks answer the question about resource and that deep growth thing. I agree with you, the framing of it is terrible. It's got to be another frame to make it sound better. But we're at the pedal to the metal problem. We have less than 11 years. We have to do this really well. And those folks can marry the MMT very well.
I think on the question of trade, one of the things that comes to my mind a lot is we talk about imports and exports without really speaking to importing and exporting what exactly, and more specifics about context around that question. So, for example, in Colombia, they're exporting all their raw materials and all their natural resources and importing a bunch of technology that they need. So they're just Latin America is putting itself in a complete dependency and basically giving themselves up as a neocolonialist dependency region to the United States. And I don't think that just imports and exports as categories tell us the whole story. So I think we need to ask ourselves deeper questions about the nature of those trade relationships and the kind of economies that they're creating at the global level.
I agree with that. I am admittedly not an expert on trade, but I do think there is sort of an element of conversation that's happened this question really badly, and I think the thing that is probably the biggest blind spot right now is sort of the rest of the world, right? We have framed, I think the Green New Deal conversation has been talked about largely with the bounds of the United States or with the bounds of whatever nation is being talked about, but it's a global problem first and foremost. And it's sort of depressing to see proposals like, I think this is a Winslow Farms proposal to make sure that anything produced American IP has to be within America, right? When the reliable demand from the global south is a big massive technology. It's just a to have a sort of much more free IP regime because we know they're and I think that's plays into this trade discussion in ways that I think are to be worked out. Right? I think that's kind of the big open question right now is how that works. And then trade, I think it's intentionally sort of abstracted in a way that it makes it hard for people to understand, where it really is sort of an expression of values of how we relate to the world. And I think there's, been just sort of horribly xenophobic parts of how we talk about sort of this trade dispute. And so I think that I am not still with those answers, but I do think that that's a huge problem. How we've, been talking about this stuff, and sort of, it's hard, it's kind of an interesting question, it's hard to think about the national boundaries. And so I think that we need to stop it.
Well, those are sufficient responses. I would just say maybe on trade, I mean, yeah, it's true. I'm sensitive, Raul, to the point for sure that, MMT has tried, as it does in so many other areas, to flip the script, right? And to say to somebody like Donald Trump, who has this preoccupation with cash flows, as a businessman often does, to look at the trade deficit and conclude that the rest of the world is killing us, right? They're ripping us off. What does he say about Japan? They send us millions of cars. What do we send them? Wheat. It's a bad deal. Those are his exact words. It's a bad deal. Okay, we get millions of cars, they get wheat. But Raul's point is important because MMT is saying, hang on, is it really a bad deal that we're importing in real terms? We get cars, right? And we import more than we export. And so, as Warren said a long time ago, we should think of this in terms of the real terms of trade. And trade deficit is a stuff surplus. It means we're taking their stuff, okay? But that's the question I think that Raul is raising. It's why are we taking so much of their stuff? And should we be expropriating resources, inputs from the rest of the world, chasing the lowest cost labor, chasing and pushing down prices and wages and so forth? And how can we transition away from the way that we currently think about trade and trade wars and tariffs to a more peaceful approach to exchange with our trading partners, not to say that we don't want trade, but that we want, in a sense, just trade, right? We want to think of, I think you used the phrase trade peace with me. And, so how can we?
Any other responses to the other two questions about the rise of the sort of right-wing industrial complex and ecological economics before we move on? Yeah, just really quick, one last point to Raul's question as well. I was having a conversation with NOMCO yesterday, and I think it's really important to consider that just the dichotomy between protectionism versus free trade is problematic in and of itself. We need to think about that a little bit more deeply, I think, and consider what are the actual needs that different countries have, and then think about trade from that vantage point. In terms of this whole kind of neoliberal institutional framework that's out there, we have to create our own. We might not have the money now, but now that we understand MMT, we can start to push to create real public purpose spending and help us build that infrastructure out. So I think that that's a key part of this question too. Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with that. On the neoliberal thought collective, I think one thing that gets underrated, which I brought up at a conference last week, or 2 weeks ago, is that part of the reason that they needed to construct all of this sort of elaborate infrastructure is because they're wrong. Because they're and so I think we have, we do have an objectively large gap in terms of the sort of institutionalization. We, do not have American Enterprise Institute or Heritage Foundation, or anything like it. But the we have is that, we're right, which isn't a solace in itself, but right in a way that I think is just more popular with people. It's a better setup to say you're not going to make people's life better than to say that a rich person should be able to afford as much wealth as possible. So I think the challenges on that front are very large, but I do think we have a few things on our side.
Also, I don't understand the fixation of some people on the left of saying that we have to couple spending with taxing. I think that that's just strategically ridiculous, because if we start our project already, we're going to build power. People are going to be doing things. They're going to be creating social relationships. They're going to be having expanding their class consciousness. We're going to be redesigning work itself. All of these things are going to lead us to have more power to then be all right, yeah, we don't want billionaires to exist. we're going to do it. Right? It's much more likely that we tax billionaires out of existence once we already start our Green New Deal and jobs guarantee project. So I think like, strategically, it just makes perfect sense.
I have a question. I had a really interesting conversation with Santa Levy recently. He gave me some interesting answers, and I want to get your perspective on this, which is economists and assume good faith are our leaders. It's a matter of political will. As if they really want to do it, they just can't get there. Or, they really are trying, they just don't know better. If only they knew better. And I understand to an extent that in papers and in order to properly refute their assertions, you have to take it seriously. I understand that. You have to assume it's good faith. But on the other side, I think it's really important that the people are not going to rise up if they genuinely feel that their leaders aren't working in good faith. And I think in some very important cases, maybe they're not working in good faith. And I don't understand how to remain respectful, but maybe perhaps be a little more accurate. And I understand in some contexts, such as papers, that that's not appropriate, but in other contexts, as an activist or communicating with other people, that how do we remain respectful, but perhaps be more accurate as far as maybe in some cases it's really just not good faith, that they use false misunderstandings as an excuse to not give us things.
More respectful, more fair.
Anyone else, please put your hand up.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Ben. Guys, I'm so excited. My question is, actually, it's a question and a comment. I'm an activist for CMOs. And Stephanie, you talked about framing. Stephanie, you talked about framing. You talked about how we interface with people that we may be speaking to when we're knocking on doors or we're canvassing, that type of thing. Would it be possible, because you guys have been through, to come up with some kind of train the trainer or train canvassers? How to do this? I saw a YouTube thing that Bill Mitchell did last week in London as a train the trainer, but something more geared towards the U.S. and what we need to do here. What do you guys think about that?
Can you repeat the last part of the question?
What do you guys think about a train-the-trainer program that could roll out of the U.S. to deal with these questions about how do I frame, how do I turn something around? We're going to be trying to get independence, and Bernie vote, the people who would have voted for Bernie, voted for Trump. We're going to try to get those guys to come with us. So we're going to need help. I think it's possible, but it's stuff we need to. Thank you.
Why don't you guys go show people do all and then we can maybe handle it later.
Okay. The way that I think of your question, Jeff, I think that's a difficult question to approach. I try to, so I think we've come a long way. When I was in high school, in the middle of the George Bush era, it seemed like John Kerry and Bill Maher was the best we had. Okay? And so with the progressive movement in any kind of like meaningful way or left was completely wiped out for a while. And I think that we need to understand different avenues that we're doing politics in and read the room and kind of feel where the rest of the people are at. And again, I'm just speaking for myself here. I think this is in a lot of ways, very reactionary, conservative country with a lot of progressive potential. And so there are spaces where, it's very important to be as ambitious as we possibly can, and there are spaces that understand that we have to make allyships and coalitions with other groups. And keep pushing through these different avenues to get ultimately to what we want, so that no matter what happens, the pressure is there. I think that's the key for me. No matter what happens, the pressure is constantly there on them. For me personally, I think it would be a disaster if Donald Trump wins. But I'm going to definitely do everything I can to make sure that only one person gets the nomination, and that's Bernie Sanders. But yeah, it is what it is. It's a difficult situation. For your question over here, yeah, I think that's something we should definitely. I mean, Bill Mitchell mentioned a number of projects that he's doing, and I think it's something for myself in particular and others to continue to consider how to produce more knowledge so that others can implement it into their practice. Sure.
I think the question of our politicians acting in good faith. I was politicized in high school as an anarchist, and so no longer an anarchist, but I still am very skeptical that politicians are good for much, right? And I think what I mean by that is not that politicians don't have a very important role to play, but I don't think we have to be nice to them, right? Like I don't think we have to assume that they don't care necessarily what is someone's heart of hearts or sort of what they think is right. I think I'm more likely to vote for someone who shares my values, right? But I think it's just worth being sort of properly stuff, right? Who's paying to say what they're saying, right? Who is funding our campaigns? Who is sort of backing them? I think that's what we need to do. And are they doing a good job? Like, are they doing the things that they need to be doing? And I think that's how we should have done the politicians. Not are they a good person? Are they what do they care about? What are their values? But what are they actually doing? So I think that's. I'm not sure if I'm getting your question, but that's how it might move.
I mean, I agree. It's perhaps occasionally possible to tap into their thinking and motives behind the things they're saying, positions that they're taking, but it's not always possible to know whether some politician is advocating a cheaper version of some program on the grounds that we can't afford a bigger version. Is it because they're trying to drown your kid? Or do they genuinely believe that, we have to deal with deficits, we have to be careful with respect to the federal budget, and this is the more responsible way to go? There are people who are out there in elected office, running for office, who don't understand that there is a way to carry out a more ambitious agenda in a way that won't break the bank, in a sense. They really don't understand. So I don't publicly attack. I mean, I'm affiliated with the campaign, so for obvious reasons, well, maybe not obvious reasons, I just have chosen to conduct myself in a particular way during the campaign season. Not everybody on every campaign does that, but there are issues when people find it useful to say that a certain campaign has a preponderance of folks who behave badly online or something like that. That reputation starts to build on itself and become self-fulfilling, and to the extent that I occasionally do or say something that checks that narrative, it's not meant to take the wind out of the sails of all of the fathers and mothers and activist groups and others who can get out there and raise hell, right? And you should, like you said, I gotta raise hell. But I have behaved differently, or I've chosen to behave differently, and that's okay. I think that's okay.
God, someone has to.
Yeah.
I can't.
Well, it's important for me in this role. What was the other? Oh, the movement, the training the trainers. This is so important to me. I've been thinking of this for years. I used to say, they onboard new politicians. When they get newly elected, look what they did to AOC and the rest of the crew, right? You get elected to Congress and they send you up to where? Harvard, right? For your onboarding. And they put you in front of the smartest people in the world, right? To talk to you about, what did she say? The corporate interests are represented, the establishment economists are represented, so you get these new politicians who don't know the ways of the federal budget and all the other stuff. And this is the information that they're presented with. There is something called the Congressional Progressive Caucus. They also do this for new members. They bring them together. They say, these people we want you listening to. Well, who do they bring in? Right, I'm not going to fill in the blanks, but the point is that it would behoove them to include some of the voices that you've heard here over the last 3 days, so that policy makers do have exposure to some of these alternative ideas, and that they're not presented with just one version of sort of left economics, that they get full opportunity to hear from a broader kind of swath of progressive economists. But I think that Sean Sebastian yesterday told us that he's doing exactly what you're talking about. He is training the trainers on the ground in Iowa. And if I recall correctly, he said that you saw the presentation, right? Money is no object. He walked through MMT and he said he had, I think he said, 5 representatives from 500 different organizations in the state of Iowa. And he's doing MMT, right, for all of them. And so he is training the people who are going to be face to face with voters, so that if they say, well, I sort of like Bernie's Medicare for All plan better than what I'm hearing, but I can't see how we can pay for it, so I'm more inclined to vote for, candidate X. I remember it. If you've got people who had a little bit of training, they can say, oh, wait a minute, hold on. We're talking about how to resource this, or you know what I mean? So I think it's happening. I think it can happen. I think it needs to happen on a bigger scale, and I think it needs to happen within the halls of Congress. And when they start giving us a seat at the table, then I think things will begin to change.
So I just want to make a clarification. The mainstream field of economics absolutely does not assume good faith on the part of politicians. Okay? This is political business cycle theory. Does not assume politicians will do right. The whole rules versus discretion debate about it is all about. Milton Friedman was all about macro policy should be constrained to a money supply rule and turn the Fed off, go away. The entire move right now about, now that we start to see, backtrack. The framework that the mainstream of the field right now built for macroeconomics was all about giving the central bank all the power because they were independent from politicians. The politicians balance your budget and get that out of the way. Now, because they all see that that's not enough, they need fiscal policy, they're all racking their brains about, okay, how do we allow fiscal policy makers to do things? But putting them constrained by rules so they don't screw everything up, because that's what politicians do. So you see a lot of the pushback against MMT with this false narrative misrepresentation that MMT is saying, oh, just raise taxes if you get inflation. And so that's an easy one for them to combat within their own narrative, because they're like, politicians won't do that, right? Bad faith. There's to be bad faith, actually, on the part of politicians. So I just want to make that clarification.
I've had a number of conversations this weekend related to the guaranteed jobs, and specifically minimum wage, living minimum wage, whatever the terminology is. And at one point it was about $22.50 an hour. And I was talking about the local hardware store in town where I might be trying to get a part-time job, that if he had to pay $22.50 an hour to the 10 employees he has on the floor, he might not be able to do that, because he competes with Home Depot and he can't get his product nearly as cheap as Home Depot gets theirs. And how's he going to do it? And the response I got from a number of people was, well, even if he has to raise prices, or if he's part of a capitalist environment, he might have to go out of business. And that's a choice he took by becoming a business owner. Now, this local business employs a lot of high school kids in town, and some locals, and I'm hoping that that's not a real view of things, because it would be a shame if this store that's been open in town for 50 years, providing a service for people not to have to drive to Home Depot, but can walk to the local hardware store or the local blind store. I'm hoping that's not a real view of all of MMT, because I feel really bad if these people who are providing services to people in town would have to be forced to close because of the guaranteed wage of $22.50. And how do we help them? It's really the question. Be able to do that.
First of all, I would like to say that I think that MMT is closer to winning the mind of American population, American public, that a lot of people think. And that represents, in my opinion, several things. You know, you studied the first New Deal, the Roosevelt's New Deal. When this project became a no-partisan project, a lot of things changed. For example, you know, the second Bill of Rights was put out. And finally, finance a one state. The USA is a one state after the Second World War. Something in Germany, I think, in the establishment of this country, you can see, you can have the declaration of the President of the United States, the paper of Marco Rubio, Senate. What is your opinion about that we can call the dark side of the MMT? It's quite simple. We can use this kind of deficits not only to Green New Deal, but to strengthen the welfare state that we now use US states. Thank you very much.
So, my question? Okay, so the first question I'd say, like, when you look around right now, do we see a lot of local businesses and hardware stores that are thriving or doing okay? I would say we're not, because they're being driven out of business, by the way. Low wages are being spread across the economy, and you know, Home Depot and these big corporations are taking advantage of that and driving small businesses out of practice. I think the second thing that's oftentimes not considered is that higher minimum wage to a living wage creates more money in people's pockets to spend. That's more sales. We forget that sales drive business. So, you know, it's a common kind of trope to say we're not going to be able to afford to pay people more, but, you know, more demand is going to bring more sales, and that's how people are going to recover that, in a lot of sense. To this question, again, dark side of MMT, I mean, that's why I always say that there's always a subject that's interpreting the descriptive principles of MMT, and that person has a certain value system and a certain agenda, a certain view. So, I mean, many people talk about military Keynesianism and the ongoing war economy that came out of the Second World War. I think that's true, but I don't see myself associating that in any way whatsoever. So, there's a battle out there to decide what we want to spend on, what kind of work we want. So I think it's that simple.
Well, I mean, I wasn't at that panel. I was in a different panel during the job guarantee. This was yesterday morning?
Just during the weekend.
Okay. Well, I don't know what it sounds to me like when you make this reference. What did you say, $22.50 or $23? Yeah, I mean, people will say things like, if real wages had kept pace with productivity growth over the last 3.5 decades or so, today the median worker, the minimum wage would be $23 an hour, something like that, right? I don't know that what you heard, so I don't know if someone was actually advocating that we introduce a federal job guarantee and start the wage at $23 an hour. That is not the way that the leading economists have been thinking about the federal job guarantee. We first started thinking about it, we were thinking, this is 20 plus years ago, right? And we were thinking, well, you could introduce a program that would provide a public option in the labor market, that would establish a floor to the wage, and in fact, it would make whatever wage you offer in the program the de facto minimum wage for the entire economy. Because Minsky always used to say, the minimum wage is not $7.25 an hour. The minimum wage in this economy is zero, because that's what you get if you're unemployed. You only get $7.25 an hour if you are employed at the minimum wage. So when we first started thinking about this, and this predates me, when Randy and Mitchell and others were thinking, the first papers that I remember seeing said, let's introduce a federal job guarantee and make the wage $7.25 an hour, but include some benefits. So it becomes a compensation package that is a wage and some benefits. But it was put forward that way in order to be the least disruptive to the rest of the economy, to come in at the current minimum wage. 20 years is a long time, okay? We've watched now 2 decades of workers not getting pay increases, 3 decades where the median worker in this country, in real terms, hasn't had a pay increase. So we say, we gotta fix this. We have structural, fundamental problems. It doesn't make sense to introduce this thing at $7.25 an hour. That's a minimum wage from the past. We need a new, higher minimum wage. So we said $15 an hour. Okay? So I don't know where the number came from that you heard, but we are aware of many states, many cities, and I think the country is headed, and that is to a $15 an hour federal minimum wage.
I mean, I was in that panel, so I also can't speak to the sort of specifics of what was said there, but if the context of this is that there is a federal job guarantee, which is guaranteeing a certain wage, setting a certain floor, that is competitive, and folks who, basically whoever is working at this hardware store would have another option, right? It's not that, these sort of small businesses would be the only employers in the area. There would be other employment, there would be a public option for employment that would pay this wage. And so I think if the new wage is in the context of an actual federal job guarantee, the prospect of that business being able to employ less people because the wage has gone up is not a problem for people, right? I think, so I just want to add that and agree with everything Stephanie said. And I think people should be paid a living wage. So.
Okay, really quickly before we wrap up, I have just one sort of closing question for each of you. In the spirit of looking at building the movement and sort of our next steps in raising the next generation of MMTers, I think one thing that's come up this weekend over and over as a theme in the interactions that I've had is centering the voices of marginalized people, whether that's women or people of color or queer people. How do we get those people in the center of the mix? How do we get them involved in the story and in the process? And I guess my specific question to you would be, what do you see as the most useful way to engage a more diverse audience of people to be involved in the movement and drive that next sort of generation, the next wave?
I think the key to that is to understand the way that public purpose and sustainable prosperity and all these different kind of concepts that MMT brings out of the conversation. How does that relate to different experiences of different communities that have been affected in different ways? We have a responsibility also to understand the different struggles that other people face who are not like us. I feel like I, as a man, have a responsibility to understand the ways that this society treats women differently than it treats me, and how I benefit from that, and using this concept of public purpose to pressure and push our policy to make sure that women and women of color are not facing poverty at higher rates than the rest of the population, that children of single families are not facing harm and violence in ways that others are not. To look at the ways that different communities and different urban areas across the country that are completely deprived of any kind of infrastructure or social stability just happen to also have people that look a particular way or come from particular backgrounds, right? We need to make those connections and understand how public purpose, how the jobs guarantee, and how the Green New Deal can align and combine to those particular needs. And understand that it makes us, even if we do not have a direct relationship with different communities, we benefit from that too, because that's when you build solidarity, and solidarity comes back in a reciprocal way, and our power increases when we do that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think doing more of the type of sort of collaboration, sort of like an institutional level and like kind of like academic level with different fields and different movements. So I think there's really interesting conversations to be had about between sort of MMT and stratification economics, for instance, between different fields that are tackling different questions and figuring out how to come together. And I know people in this room have done those sorts of collaborations for figuring out how just whether it's having more panels on that or having a whole conference on that or whatever it is. I think that's can be. I mean, I would love to have that personally, and I think that's just really sort of important intellectual work to be doing. And I think working directly with movements. I think there are, beyond the Sunrise movement, just a lot of folks sort of in this space who I would love to hear from with regard to some of these questions. I think, we think about sort of the green jobs conversation, I think, in kind of what work looks like, for instance, in the Green New Deal, and can think about that in sort of narrow ways. But I would love to have kind of nurses thinking about this question, have the nurses union with sort of L-fund issues, really, hear sort of like a conversation with folks in the MMT world, domestic workers life, I think it's sort of in the sort of broad progressive sphere. So finding sort of links and just having more folks in the room, having more folks up on stage, in ways that is really generous. And just really listening to where folks are coming from.
I think the answer is like a single word, it's inclusion. It's being inclusive, it's being mindful when you're drafting legislation about student debt cancellation. The only voices you're listening to are a couple of white researchers in the think tank in the DC Beltway area. You're going to get different sort of policy advice as opposed to reaching out to somebody like Derek Hamilton or Trustee Camille Cotton and saying, how should we be thinking of student debt cancellation? If you're interested in narrowing the racial wealth gap, the best way to approach this is to cancel all of it. That's what I'm saying. So at every possible turn, those of us who are in positions to make the invitations to others need to make sure that we're doing the hard work and thinking about the groups and organizations and the voices that need to be represented so that the conversation includes the varied interests, everybody's represented, and that's what you both just said. I just said it in different words.
All right. Are there any other questions in the audience before we wrap up? No one has anything?
That was fantastic. Thanks.
All right. Let's give our panelists one more round of applause.
That would be me. Okay, we're going to drive us home, but hopefully not take up too much of your time. This is predominantly a list of thank yous and deep gratitude to everybody who all made this work possible. I like to think of this as a space where there is certainly a formal component where we all interact based on the structure that's been set up. But beyond that, we also get to informally meet each other and develop relationships that are fertile for creative thinking later on the book. But in terms of thank yous, can we just get a big hand for everybody at Stony Brook University, our hosts, to join the plan and having it responsible and listeners on our campus. To the student volunteers over here who have been helping us throughout the conference. To the administrators, especially Ms. Karen, and everybody who helped us with the paperwork and the permits and many months of work. Thank you. Thanks to all of the donors, both those who sent checks and both those who clicked on the online button on mymoneynetwork.org that is still there and will continue to be there after this conference. Thank you. Thanks to everyone who contributed labor of any kind to this conference. The list is so extensive that I'm afraid I can't name individuals because that would be its own panel. But thank you all. So many people chipped in such a variety of ways, whether it was sending emails, booking things, helping with the registration desk, helping with name tags, just making sure that other people were okay and comfortable throughout the conference. Thank you all very much. Please give each other a round of applause. For your time, for your patience, above all, for your energy. Thank you. A small note about conference organizing. Again, thank you for your patience. Logistical events come up, things happen the day of, the day before, the day after. That it takes this whole team of people to field. Everything doesn't run as smoothly as you expect it to.
But with that in mind, we're hoping to even further expand the conference organizing team next year. So if you would like to help with organizing the conference, please send an email to conference@mtconference.org, and we'll start organizing the next event far in advance, right? I can tell you that right now the organizing committee has a thought. Next year, we are going to we're going to make the final march from the backwater to the swamp. And we're going to have the next MMT conference in DC. We're going to be right there, in the order of the power. We need some important crucial questions that are being debated, and we are going to make our presence known. Looking forward to seeing you all there. Thank you. Yes, and it will be this weekend for Thank you.